Good afternoon and welcome MVLA family to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Nellie Meyer and I am the Superintendent of MVLA. I would like to introduce the President of our Board of Education, Sanjay Dave.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Meyer. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining MVLA's Reopening and Redesigning Fall 2020 webinar. Before I introduce the amazing panelists we have today, I want to convey a heartfelt gratitude to each of the panelists today and the task force committee and subgroups who aren't on the panel today, but have been working tirelessly in the background throughout this whole process. I also want to give a special thank you to Dr. Meyer for her leadership throughout this entire process. An incredible responsibility has been thrust upon you to create a new learning paradigm relatively in a blink of an eye. As we learn more and more about the myriad of issues needed to be addressed, we're in deep gratitude for you taking on this Herculean task. Thank you very much. So joining me today on the board is Fiona Walters, Vice President of the board, and Trustee Phil Fillais. Debbie Torek and Catherine Vonnegut had other commitments that didn't allow them to join us today. So now I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists. So we have Layla Benson, Associate Superintendent, Personnel Services, William Blair, District Wellness Coordinator, David Campbell, Teacher and current President of the District Teachers Association, Bob Fishstrom, Director of Information Services, Kristen Hardy, Director of Special Education, Mike Matheson, Associate Superintendent, Business Services, Margarita Navarro, Associate Superintendent, Educational Services, Bill Pierce, Alternative Education, and Wynn Satterwhite, Principal, Los Altos High School. So on behalf of the board, we thank you for your participation. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Meyer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to start out by sharing a brief statement and some information about some of the work that we have been doing. First of all, I want to share with our family and our families in our community that our goal as a district is to return to campuses in the way most of us know and prefer. But we do know that when we do return, it will likely be with physical restrictions. I want to say also that many of you attended our last webinar on college admissions, and we appreciate your support and the questions that you provided. We have also had numerous board reports, and we're continuing the reopening planning throughout the summer and into the year and adjusting as needed. I want to say that while we are monitoring the guidelines from the county and the state, we've started to plan for every possible scenario, and we may face more than one of those scenarios once we reopen. We meet regularly with the county and are awaiting a firm go, no-go decision and a status update as soon as possible, so we can plan accordingly and start to invest even more time in the opening strategy. We recognize that each week that we're here working on this brings a change in our landscape. So I want to applaud this team that you will hear from today, because we have really been flexible and nimble and creative in the work that you're going to hear about. We are also expecting that in the first week of July that the County Public Health and the County Office of Education will release more specific guidance and have a recommendation for the school districts within Santa Clara County. A few updates as well. We started our planning, and when we did, we identified 3 questions that we had to answer. What worked well in the spring of 2020 for students and staff? What do we need to do to improve, and what needed improvement? And we also talked a lot about how do we measure the work that we're doing. Our team got together, and as was stated, we had a task force team and advisory teams. We incorporated over 100 staff members and are beginning the process of communicating to the community, and we'll have that as ongoing communication throughout the summer. The areas that we focused on included technology and facilities, instruction, curriculum and assessment, counseling and therapeutic services, teacher support and training, student support and training, special education, alt ed and continuation programs, adult education programs, and parent and community engagement. So now we're at the point where we are going to share what is needed now, what are some of the things that we want to do when we reopen, and the 3 areas that we are going to look at with our scenarios include continued distance learning, a hybrid with both distance learning and some on-campus learning opportunities, or the full return with physical restrictions. So we await that particular guidance. Over the last week, one of the things that we did to prepare for this webinar, you may have participated in it as well. We solicited questions from our community, and we received quite a few questions, and many of them were in the same themes. So today, we put together some of those questions, and we brought our district experts to the table, and we are going to share with you some of the frequently asked questions and give you more information. We also met with a parent group that had other ideas about questions and things that they would like us to consider, and that is part of this presentation as well. I also want to share, because we had so many questions, we will continue this ongoing dialogue, and we also are creating a frequently asked question document that will have some of the specific questions that you may not hear this afternoon. So today we're going to talk about our exciting topics: grades and assessment, which is an important one, wellness and student support, college readiness and what we're doing instructionally, safety, of course, and the hygiene that goes with it, academics and our academically excellent programs and how we are going to continue to support our students towards that excellence, and the professional development that our teachers will need to really enter this new frontier. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start, and we're going to have department leads answer some questions for you. And we're going to start off with our Associate Superintendent of Human Resources. And so I would like to introduce Layla Benson.
Thank you for having me this evening or this afternoon.
So Layla, your department is often called upon to support the health and safety of our teachers and our staff. And we know many guidelines have been discussed with HR teams across the county and across the state. Could you share some of the actions that we may need to take?
Yes, so there are numerous actions that we will need to take, so I will summarize. The county HR professionals meet on a weekly basis to receive new guidance and to anticipate what it is we may need to do, given a variety of circumstances that we do not have confirmation on. So some of the things that we know for certain that we are going to need to have are temperature checks. There's going to need to be a very clear procedure for making sure that all people, if we are physically back on a campus, whether that be students or staff, they need to be well when they come. So along with the temperature checks, there will need to be very clear procedures for that. We need to be mindful of everyone's privacy and safety. We also need to have available for all individuals on our campus, should they need to come to campus, facial coverings. Also, we need to ensure that there are ample sanitation stations so that hand washing can be frequent. We also will have hand sanitizer that has been hard to come by, as we all are aware. So we have been preparing to have appropriate amounts of hand sanitizer. Along with these procedures for sanitation, we also have to have physical distancing protocols. So whatever the guidelines are in relation to the timeline when we will be physically returning, we will then need to create signage and protocols and train staff in close proximity to the time that we will be having, especially students back on campus. You know, student safety is always at the forefront of our mind. And so we want to make sure that students are safe, and by making sure our staff remains safe, that will also ensure that students remain safe. There is going to be a strong possibility that we are going to have long-term absences of students and staff, depending on how the health crisis evolves. So we will need to have trained substitutes. And so our substitutes that will be working will go through an additional training in all of the areas that I just described, as well as whatever other protocols we need to implement.
So Layla, what will happen if a teacher or a staff member is diagnosed with COVID-19 currently?
Well, and currently we have obviously removed that individual, and the more recent protocol when we were physically at work was for that person to be off of work for a minimum of 14 days. We will of course follow whatever guideline is given to us at the time that we return. We will also have an appropriate notification system. If anyone was exposed, we will of course send out those appropriate notifications. Depending on our circumstances, we may or may not have that individual, depending on their health at the time, work remotely or not. Again, these are the kinds of accommodations we will have to figure out at the time.
So we had a question that came in, and the question was around our negotiations process. So what are the items that will need to be negotiated before teachers return in August?
So we have already begun those conversations with our negotiating teams. We have DTA and CSEA as our unions who consult with us regarding a variety of items. We have been discussing these items all summer, and will continue those conversations. Some of the key areas that we will need to discuss are school. Sorry, I think my system paused. School and work calendar, the hours of employment, any kind of potential workload impact or shift in duties, and then the hours that our employees will need to be working depending on the mode of instruction and how our school is constructed in the fall. So again, these are just the key areas that we will need to discuss. We have, when we went into the distance learning format, we entered into an MOU with our unions, and we will anticipate that we will do the same thing once we receive further clarification. We will collaboratively work together as we have to come up with the best possible plan for our employees to provide educational services to our students.
Okay, anything else that we need to think about?
No, I think, in summary, really, we are prepared. We have run through a variety of scenarios, and we anticipate the directions that are to come. And once we have those confirmed, then we really build and focus our discussions on the specific areas where we need to provide safety for all involved.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Our next presenter, I'd like to introduce William Blair, and he is our wellness coordinator. And William, there has been a lot of concern from families as well as teachers and staff and students themselves about wellness and well-being. Parents have expressed concerns that their children are not motivated or were not motivated in the last few months of school, that their sleeping patterns were disrupted, and that there was just great concern about mental health. During distance learning, they stated to us that it was really amplified and of great concern. So could you share a little bit about what we could do to support students' mental health and what we plan to do when they return?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Meyer, and hello, everybody. First and foremost, I want to say that it is a concern for us. We're particularly concerned about the uptick in anxiety and depression and suicide ideation, not only with our young people, but just with everyone in the country. There was a recent survey that indicated about 1/3 of all Americans are showing signs of clinical depression and/or anxiety. When it comes to our youth, it's even higher in a self-reported survey. About half of our Californian students said that they could use mental health services here during school closure. And just to give a comparison, usually about 22% of our students receive mental health services during the school year when we're on campus. So that's an increase in, over about 32% more students saying that they could use the services. So it's, so the pandemic is definitely causing concern for mental health. which brings us to the question, which is about lack of motivation and sleeping patterns. We know that sleep deprivation negatively affects our mental health. We also know that it can impair thinking, it can impair emotional regulation, and that, you know, the lack of sleep can also have health consequences as well and exacerbate previous mental health conditions, specifically depression and anxiety, which is what we're seeing increase. On top of the irregular sleeping patterns, we also have students that are under a constant state of stress and duress from the pandemic. I mean, even for me, going to the grocery store is anxiety producing, let alone worrying about your rent or worrying about food, the social isolation that's kind of forced upon us. There's a reason why social isolation is one of the worst punishments that we have, because we need it as humans. We thrive on it, and we thrive on those connections. So all of these stressors are increasing biologically, you know, physiologically in us, producing more cortisol and more adrenaline, which in turn makes it more complicated for us to sleep. So all of these things are all kind of interrelated. And so I just want to kind of highlight that. And that brings us to, okay, well, what can we do? And that's really about setting structures and routines. Most of the mental health, or all the mental health professionals, recommend a few of the core strategies in creating structures and routines. Our California Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, released a playbook with some stress-busting, 6 stress-busting strategies. And so at the top of the list is quality sleep, and really making sure that we get that sleep, making sure that we're setting bedtimes, that we have a schedule for waking up, and that we're consistent in that, so that we're getting that sleep. And then another component is our physical activity, making sure that we're getting out, that we're exercising, we're getting fresh air safely where and when we can. And making sure that we have a balanced nutrition, like what we put in our body really does affect our mood and our sleep and our thinking. So be sure that we're eating healthy. Maintaining our supportive relationships, as difficult as it is, but staying connected with our communities, our clubs, our families, our friends, our loved ones, even if it is virtually, but just having these social moments of social connection support us. Most mental health professionals also encourage some mindfulness practices, whether it's meditation or prayer or gratitude practices, but some way of being mindful and bringing us, grounding us back in our bodies and in ourselves. And then where and when needed, always reaching out for mental health or behavioral health support. And as we're designing these structures and routines, it's really important, we'd like to emphasize the role of the family in helping to create those systems. We know our students better than anybody else, and really having a collaborative family discussion. What are some of the structures? What are some of the routines that are helpful? Taking the opportunity to check in with your young person and saying, well, how are you feeling? Like, what kind of support can I give you? And then, because it's a family system, creating those structures and those routines as a family. And you're not alone in trying to do that. We have lots of resources. Greater Good is a website that has a list of parenting resources, as well as other resources. We have links on our website you can go to get some of that support, as well as a link to the Surgeon General's playbook, so you can look at those stress-busting strategies as well.
William, that's really good advice for our staff as well, because this has been a hard time for our staff. So I appreciate those comments. Yeah. Another question we received, families who don't speak English at home are struggling with how to support their children and how to find services. And I do want to share at this point that this webinar transcript will be translated, and we will make sure it is available, and the information is available to the community through future DLACs and other avenues. But could you share what kind of services or resources are available for families with students who have English as their second language, and perhaps where they could find some of these things?
Yeah, so we have some of those resources, online on our website, but most of the resource lists that we generate are both in English and Spanish. A lot of the links are in English, but there are some links that are in Spanish as well. We also have our bilingual staff who's been working really diligently in supporting all of our students. Sometimes Some of our Spanish-speaking families, especially our recent immigrants, have unique needs in these situations. And we've really had a robust support system in place. We're reaching out to the families, connecting with the families, seeing how we can support them to address the student needs. We've had about $75,000 donated to provide support for our families. And that includes kind of creating lists and pamphlets and art supplies for therapeutic support, food, housing assistance, all sorts of assistance kind of in place. So we encourage families to reach out to us because we do have staff on all of our services that we provide in English, our mental health services, our other outreach services and connections community agencies we have in both English and Spanish. So we encourage folks to reach out to us so we can get them connected with the right people who can support them in their language.
You mentioned an important point that our families contributed funds, that our foundation contributed funds, and our teachers union contributed funds. So we have a very strong community who cares about supporting each other. Another question that we received: how are counselors and therapists going to be available and connect with students if they aren't able to come back to campus?
Yeah, well, I mean, we had some practice on March 13th when everything closed. So right away, what we did is we created remote telehealth for our therapists, as well as teleconferencing with our school counselors, so we can provide the one-to-one services remotely through technology. And so we were able to continue to provide our therapeutic services to all the students on our caseload. We were able to continue that through telehealth, as well as support additional referrals that came from staff and students. And we were able to do that via telehealth, whether it's by the phone or by video conferencing, whatever is comfortable for the students. And our school counselors, as I mentioned, also moved over to teleconferencing, and they were able to use Zoom to guide our families through the final stages of graduation and transition. And so we're grateful for that. In the fall, if we go back to distance learning, we have a robust plan to respond to the needs of our struggling students. The school counselors will continue to support our seniors and their families as they manage their way through the ever-changing landscape of college admissions. Our school counselors communicate regularly with our colleges and universities, so that as things evolve, they will continue to be here to support our students and families and help keep them in the best position. I'm sorry, I think you're muted.
Unmute. One other thing, William, I know we have partners in the community who support us as well, and they're using telehealth. Could you perhaps share just a few of our partners that we work with?
Yeah, totally. When the school closure happened, we were working very closely with our community organization, CHAC, Community Health Awareness Council, and we kind of worked hand in hand in kind of building the telehealth system. CHAT continues to support our students on campus, and they continue to support them through the school closures. We also worked with CHC and more recently Uplift Family Services, who are continuing to provide telehealth services and family engagement as needed. And so one of the things that I always kind of say is through the school closure, we've actually created even stronger connections with our community agencies in having a more robust wraparound support for our students. And so it's been one of the blessings that have come out of the pandemic.
Thank you, William. Thank you. The next person I would like to introduce is Dave Campbell. And as mentioned previously, Dave is a Spanish teacher at Mountain View High School, as well as the president of our Teachers Association, DTA. So Dave, families want to know how our teachers are doing and how they're finding silver linings in distance learning and school closure. Could you describe some of the successes you have seen or heard about, and also some of the challenges that teachers have faced, teachers, counselors, and others have faced?
Sure, and just to mix things up, I'm going to be answering in Spanish, so we'll have to go back and watch the transcript later to do it in English.
Excellent.
I know at least Margaret is with me on that one. So I've heard many successes from teachers, and we've truly got amazing staff. There are a couple that were a little bit more public that I think we all saw throughout the district. There was the work by the drama students at Los Altos, which was amazing. Our choir, our instrumental ensembles at Mountain View produced some solo programs that were very inspiring. And I don't get to often see those performances because I live far from the district, and so it's a little difficult to attend those concerts. So it was fun to see those. In addition, so one of the English teachers shared with me that they were able to have a very successful Socratic seminar through Zoom, which is a feat. Personally, my silver lining was being able to see my students during this difficult time. Their smiles truly brighten my day. Also, on a personal note, this time, even though it's been very tough, it has allowed me to spend more time connecting with my family, be it through Zoom or just walking with my wife in the early evening, where we would normally be spending that hour in 2 separate commutes. Challenges are something that I've spoken to in previous board meetings. It was difficult for many of our teachers who have children in partner districts and had to teach the elementary curriculum simultaneously with their high school curriculum. And you had problems with bandwidth and being kicked out of your own Zoom call. That was a first for me, being kicked out of my own classroom. A little embarrassing, but kids are resilient. It was also very difficult to conduct class when none of the students would enable their webcam. We depend on the facial reactions or the ah, or the body language of our students to know whether they have understood something. And not being able to see them or hear that sound of learning, that, oh, that's the sound of learning, and we don't get to hear that because everybody's muted because they're all following those norms. All that gets added to the fact that many of us are teaching from the coffee table or the couch in our living room, while for many, their child is in the kitchen, their spouse is in the bedroom, and they're all on a simultaneous Zoom with different parties and competing for that speaking or listening time. Ultimately, though, the hardest thing was to, within a period of weeks, convert our in-classroom instruction into online instruction. Our staff is some of the best around, though, and we will be ready for the new school year to start. I'm so grateful that the district is already committed to providing targeted professional development and training to make sure that our teachers are empowered to provide the excellent education that our community is accustomed to. You're muted again.
Darn, it was so wonderful what I just said. Early on in the conversation, we talked a little bit about the task force. Could you address the task force from the role of a teacher and describe the teacher leadership in the process?
Yeah, I'm so grateful and pleased for the strong relationship between our district administration and our Teachers Association and our teachers. It has been made clear to us that our professional expertise is a source of knowledge that they want to tap into, that you want to tap into, Dr. Meyer. It was incredible to see over 100 teachers joining our advisory groups, and the response from the district was, yes, let them all join. Anybody that wants to have a voice, be involved. And we are the professionals that are going to be tasked with delivering this instruction, so why shouldn't we have the strongest voice? Those teachers represented department leaders, site leaders, and then in the task force, specifically our union leaders and negotiators were all able to provide their valuable input as representatives who have been elected by the teachers and managers of the contract that protect our workers' rights. I have truly felt that every member of the task force, be they teachers representatives or district representatives, have all approached each of these issues through the same lens that we use for our teachers union. What is best for our students?
Absolutely, thank you. And another question, currently we're preparing, and that's what this conversation is about. Could you tell us some of the ideas teachers may have or may be talking about on how to build relationships with students they have not met yet? That's the big challenge. Normally you meet, you have a routine, you build community in the beginning of the year, and it's not so simple now with this hybrid model. So could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I'm really proud to say that as an MBLA employee, when I first started working in the district, for the first 2 years I was in the district, I had the benefit of having the guidance of master teachers. In my time, I was working with teachers like Terry Fott, Steve Kale, and they really took the time to instill the importance of building that bond within our classes. And that really left a mark on me and on my instruction. And I think we all know the more comfortable students are with each other, the more comfortable they are with the teacher, the more willing they are to take those educational risks. Some of the ideas I received from faculty members are pretty amazing, and I'm happy to say I'm going to use probably every one of them, but I won't list them all, but here's some samples. One of the most notable modifications for my classes last year was enabling the webcam so students could see one another, and being able to interact with the peers even just by seeing their faces was something that many will try and engage this year. Another idea is having each student make a day in the life video. Another teacher called it a walkabout video of no more than a minute long, and I'm probably going to be making one myself. It's key. We've got to show ourselves as much as we can and as comfortable as we can be. At middle college, they're going to be splitting out classes into pods and teaching similar groups of students at a time. They're hoping that with only 12 kids in a Zoom meeting, they'll be able to connect with them on a more personal basis. Another teacher will offer them some creative options, like taking a tour of the favorite place in their town, or it could be the room in your house or the tree in your neighborhood, something that is, or how they connect with the curriculum. A recurring idea was the use of the app Flipgrid, which allowed students to record, edit, and share a personal video. We could have small get-to-know-you sessions via Zoom, using platforms like Nearpod and Padlet to both get verbal and written responses from the students. That's another very popular one. One of the most common ideas, basically, though, was small groups, small groups, small groups. Then one teacher suggested that they keep them kind of in cohorts for maybe a couple weeks or maybe even a month, then rotate those cohorts, and so students get very comfortable with that group of students. The reality is none of this is going to happen overnight. In a traditional instructional setting, it takes weeks to months. Another option was writing in a discussion board, and then the students need to respond to at least 2 other people's posts or comment on their videos with a Flipgrid video reply. Counselors, they won't be able to give their traditional welcome freshman presentations, so they're going to be doing it virtually, and they're also hoping to film a mini introductory video, sort of a meet your counselor thing, where each person introduces themselves, say a little bit about themselves, etc. I've heard that many teachers actually are considering doing this meet your teacher video, and I think it'll be very valuable. In general, I think we all need to be sure that all of our students know each other and know how to use the online tools and platforms fully before we really begin to dive into that new content in the new school year.
Excellent. And I think for some, it took a little getting used to getting on camera and being comfortable with the new mode, but I'm pleased to hear of all of the progress. So thank you. Thank you. Speaking of many of these technology, tech apps and different things, I'd like to introduce our Director of Technology, Bob Fistrom. And Bob, I have to commend you. Our information services tech team had an interesting year. You had to do a lot of jumping into the fray of things. And then when the pandemic hit, you did a great job of getting technology into the hands of students and teachers. So could you please describe that process of making sure that we were equipped with the correct technology and perhaps continue to do that?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Dr. Meyer. We were very fortunate in the fact that MVLA is a BYOD district for students. And of the students who did not bring their own device, we have been issuing Chromebooks out for several years. So even prior to the pandemic, we had nearly 2,000 students across the district who had district issued Chromebooks to them. However, some of those Chromebooks weren't being used regularly. They wouldn't hold a charge. And we had a fantastic team of assistant principals and their support staff to put together days, not only the communication to students, but to put together times for students to come and families through an assembly line and actually exchange their Chromebook. I was also fortunate to work closely with Associate Superintendent Mike Matheson to procure mobile hotspots through T-Mobile. We selected T-Mobile because their Empowered Ed program let us have unlimited data, and we really knew that data would be stretched thin for students. So obviously many districts were in the same situation, and those hotspots were in high demand. So it took us about 10 to 15 days to get those and distribute them. And it was a true team effort. And again, we used the assembly line to reach out to the students. And I also want to commend our bilingual liaisons on every campus who reached out to non-English speaking families and really ensured students were getting the technology they needed. As far as teachers are concerned, the last couple of years, MVLA has providing new staff members with a device when they're hired. And a few years back through negotiations, a cohort of teachers also had devices, but those devices were aging out. So we were able to put together a survey and determine who needed an upgrade. And we have actually just received those devices this week and are working very diligently to get those out to staff as soon as possible, knowing that we need to give them the most up-to-date and powerful machine in order for them to deliver quality instruction and not have situations like Mr. Campbell just discussed and being dropped off or not having enough memory when running Zoom and another application at the same time.
I know other districts shared that they were paying quite a bit for the data, so that unlimited data is such an important thing. So that is wonderful to hear, and that really helped us this year. Another question that has come to us, and you know we've been talking about all of these things quite a bit. There have been a lot of questions from parents about using the Google Suite and wanting to see if there was a central place or a single way that students could go see their assignments. And there had been also discussion about what would be the best way to provide that through some kind of organized learning management system or through some other way. Could you explain a little bit about what a learning management system is and what it does? And I guess also share with the Google Suite what that provides for us and how they're different.
Great, absolutely. So a learning management system is essentially a central repository for staff, students, and families to gather information for all classes in one place. Instead of jumping from website to website for various teachers, they could theoretically log into a learning management system and see the information for all their classes. Within that realm, a teacher can post announcements, deliver instruction, they could do online discussions with their students, they can assign work, they could grade work. And the other beauty of a learning management system is it brings all your ed tech tools together in one place. They use a tool called learning tools interoperability. So a tool such as Flipgrid that's been previously mentioned actually works within a learning management system. So a student just logs into one place and they can get all that information. There are a lot of apps that our teachers are using really successfully, and a learning management system would really help provide that consistency across the board. It does not make Google go away. Our staff has done a wonderful job with the Google tools. And Google Suite, you know, Google's in our backyard for MVLA and they're a fabulous company to work with. Google works, all their tools work extremely well within any learning management system. So that's definitely a benefit for a common look and feel and just a common playing level for all participants. But learning management systems are also used at all of our feeder colleges and are a very, very popular method for delivering instruction. So having a learning management systems also helping our students be prepared for that next level.
So that's wonderful to hear about how we would not lose something, but perhaps it would be a way to organize. As with any implementation, it doesn't happen all at once, and we certainly do have expert practitioners who are very successful with Google Classroom. So could you share how students would continue to use Google Suite?
Yeah, so that will definitely be dependent on how the teachers are going to deliver their instruction. And obviously we want to support them during this challenging time and when times become better. So even if they decide, you know, a learning management system isn't going to be the place I'm going to go to immediately, they can still do a very minimal thing, whereas log into a learning management system and provide students with a link to their Google Classroom or their instance of Google or to other resources they are using. So the students are still getting the common place where they could log in and then branch out to their various classes. Again, Google plays really well with all the learning management systems out there, and it's almost a seamless thing. So it's a common look and feel. Obviously, every system has its own pluses and minuses, and we know there's nothing perfect out there, but a learning management system along with Google's definitely can provide consistency for all of our stakeholders.
So I know we've talked a little bit, Bob, about how professional development might be delivered, especially at a distance, and also how any big implementation of something like an LMS or of anything really would need to be phased. Could you share a little bit about some of the plans you have around professional development for technology?
Absolutely. So we are going to do a early adopters program with Canvas Learning Management System. And as such, I've been working closely with Associate Superintendent Ms. Navarro on building a staff development plan for this that she will be advertising later this week to all staff who are interested in being an early adopter. And essentially entering into an agreement with Canvas, we are able to get training with them, but also provide them with ongoing training based on our own experiences using the LMS, as well as our agreement with Canvas lends us the opportunity for all staff members to learn at their own pace online through modules Canvas has set up. The other element of this training is how do we get this out to our students and their families? Because that is extremely important. Wonderful if the teachers can use it, but now how do we message this effectively to our very important stakeholders out there who need this? And so we have, that's also part of our adoption with Canvas, where they have a playbook, so to speak, where they'll provide us modules that we will deliver to the students. We will message it out to the families. We'll provide training and other resources through Zoom and other avenues in order to do our best to meet the needs of all stakeholders out there.
And Bob, a question about time. How much time does it take to shift if you have a lot of things that are already in a program like Flipgrid or Google Suite? How much time would it take to put that under another umbrella?
Well, every user has their different comfort zones with technology. I think it's fair to say.
Okay.
I think for the power user, the person who's really comfortable with Google, it's going to be a pretty simple transition. Others will, it might take a little bit longer, but the training sequence we have designed is a 10-hour compensated session or sequence for teachers, where they will get not only the basics, but how to do other advanced features that are engaging and time-saving, grading online, putting a rubric online, things of that nature to make learning very transparent for the students and also easier for the teachers as far as just being able to communicate effectively and through one common avenue. So the 10 hours would be for the staff, and then we will provide ongoing through our own. We will have our IS team as well as our information services team ready to provide all support needed as well. And like I previously mentioned, we will support staff and students or staff and families to our very best ability. And I think the most important thing is to provide consistent and clear communication, and make the training and resources flexible and scalable for those involved. And
I know that you've been out doing demos for groups of teachers, and could you say a little bit about that?
Actually, I have to give it up to Dave Campbell. We put together a session on a Friday afternoon, and he had over 40 of his DTA constituents participating in that. So it was awesome, and Canvas was great. They had a Q&A going, and they were addressing the questions along the way, and got a lot of positive feedback from DTA members after seeing the strength in the tool, talking about some of their apprehensions, but understanding why we would want to go in this direction for stronger teaching and better learning overall. So it was very well received.
Thank you. That's good to hear. All right. So I would like to now introduce Kristen Hardy. She is our Director of Special Education. Kristen, thank you for being here. Some of the questions that we received. Students with disabilities have IEP goals that can be challenging with distance learning. And I think that's fair to say that's an understatement. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you plan to put in place to address this?
That is very true. Our data from spring 2020 does indicate that special education students were disproportionately at risk for limited engagement and access to instruction. The IEP was designed for in-person instruction, and distance learning dramatically changed the learning landscape. The individual student learning plan that we developed in spring was created for each student to describe how their goals and services were addressed during distance learning. This plan was different from the IEP, but designed to mirror the instructional model for all students. Throughout spring, teacher and specialists collected many forms of data in terms of academic achievement and engagement, including progress on their IEP goals. And the expectation is for students with IEPs to access instruction and make meaningful progress. We will be closely reviewing this data during summer in order to differentiate the service delivery model and individual student supports moving into fall.
Great. Now, another question, and this is a Santa Clara County question that came up, but also from a parent. Some local districts are asking their students with disabilities to return early. Are there any plans for that?
We are definitely prioritizing students with IEPs to return to in-person instruction as soon as feasibly possible. At this point, that will not be prior to the start of school for all students, though, on August 12th. We know that students with IEPs have more barriers to learning. For many students, their learning needs necessitate multiple modes of instruction, including synchronous and in-person learning opportunities. Data of student progress from spring will assist us in identifying the type and amount of instruction for service delivery model to target and address specific skill deficits identified in each student's IEP.
Okay, so I know we're looking at multiple models to address the needs of students who have varying needs. Could you maybe tell us some of the conversations you've had about what a hybrid model would look like for students with disabilities?
Sure. We are considering multiple models, and they're going to be dependent on the learning strengths, deficits, barriers, and curriculum for both programs and individual students. As we've talked about in this, we're planning for so many different eventualities, so we want to make sure that our plans are nimble and flexible and can quickly adjust to shifting conditions, ensuring students' continued access to their supports and services. But thinking in terms of the different maybe programs of students who are receiving services, for students with mild, moderate disabilities who are on a diploma track, every one of those students is enrolled in a learning skills class, which they take with their case manager, who provides support for content and executive functioning such as study skills, organization, time management, self-advocacy. And the configuration of the learning skills period may include synchronous sessions, office hours, all facilitated by a student's individual case manager. So they have that relationship with that person who really knows their learning needs and can adjust that instruction and support the bridge to the other classes to support the student in better accessing those things. The size of the group is going to depend on those student needs, as I discussed before, sort of how we look at our data and where students are being successful and where we might need to enhance supports. As with in-person instruction, our instructional assistants are still incredibly key to making those connections with students and providing that additional layer of support. As students and staff are able to return to campus, we're exploring the idea of potentially having students return in cohorts with their case manager for more in-person support. For students enrolled in specialized academic instruction courses, so we have the learning skills classes, and then we have every course offered for the diploma, also offered through special education for students who have more needs. The instructional models for those classes and supports mirror what's going on for general education. But in addition to that, we add specially designed instruction and curriculum so that we're closely targeting and closing those learning gaps trained as taught by specially trained teachers in a smaller learning environment. For students in our life skills and post-senior programs, the curriculum is very different, as are the students' barriers to learning. And so these specific needs are being really carefully considered as we're having conversations about moving back into fall in light of health and safety guidelines. Using our district's workability funds, the district is exploring integrating some new instructional resources that focus on transition, functional skills, community access, all of which have been challenging initially to deliver in a distance learning format. And these tools will be available for both distance and in-person instruction, and will address the unique learning styles of students in that program. These tools will also allow us to gather a lot of information about how students are accessing, acquiring, and retaining the knowledge in these areas. And we're exploring multiple avenues to increase in-person support and services based on individual student learning needs. In terms of our designated services, speech, individual counseling, and OT services were really effectively delivered via telehealth modality during the spring, and will probably continue for the most part to continue with that model moving into fall due to some of the health and safety concerns and just how those services are configured. But obviously we'll be making sure that students are really accessing those. Just as with in-person instruction, we anticipate service delivery models for students will be a work in progress, being refined as we move forward through different phases of the process by consistently monitoring student access and progress to make sure that we're on track and students are on track.
So especially for the self-contained classrooms that we have, the number that we receive from public health will be very important to you, the ratio. And we'll also have to consider the one-on-one aids and what that means for social distancing. So you do have quite a few challenges in how it will be delivered. We received another question, Kristen, that applies to a lot of our students, not specifically the ones that you just mentioned, but what kind of processes do you see being put into place for the fall for students with 504s? That will be a challenge, as well as students coming from our partner districts who have 504s or who perhaps may need one.
Sure. We anticipate maintaining the same process for 504s moving into next year. The district has a very well-defined process for ensuring that every teacher receives student 504 plans prior to the start of the school year, so they have time to review those, and they can ask for clarification and receive support from administration in terms of providing those accommodations. For our incoming ninth graders, we already have a list from our partner district of all the students with 504 plans, and the sites are already working on notifying teachers for those courses and making sure that those teachers have that information entering the year. And then our typical process is we wait a few weeks until teachers get to know students and have an opportunity to review the existing 504 plans, and then parents are offered, for our continuing students, they'll receive a letter over the summer saying, is the 504 working? Should we just continue this? Would you like to meet and discuss any need for changes? For our incoming ninth graders, that's our first opportunity to get to know our students. And so those students are all encouraged to have an in-person meeting, several weeks into the fall, so that teachers and staff have an opportunity to get to know those students and what those learning needs may be, so that we can really think meaningfully about what the 504 looks like for the high school. We know that students have experienced different and in some cases more challenges during distance learning. We've got a team of psychologists, coordinators, administrators working together to determine which challenges may be temporary due to specific nature of the current unique learning environment and can be addressed maybe just through adjustments to a specific class or a mode of instruction, versus those that may have more long-lasting and pervasive impact and require more formal plans. The change to distance learning has impacted everyone in our system, students, teachers, parents, and it came really abruptly. Move forward into fall, we're looking at ways to address common barriers and to learning for all of our students to support the access and engagement and progress in all areas. And Dave spoke very eloquently about all of the ways that teachers are already really reflecting on their current instructional practices and thinking about how to address any of those barriers to students as they move into fall to remove those.
Thank you, Kristen. That's a very comprehensive response, and we appreciate the work that you've been doing in this area. Now shifting gears a little bit, I would like to introduce our Associate Superintendent of Business, Mike Matheson. And Mike, you know, in the news everywhere, we're hearing about all of the things that you're going to be focusing on and you have been focusing on. And, you know, we want to make sure our students and staff are protected even when we do come back. Could you talk a little bit about what has been done or what will be done to ensure health and safety upon return?
Yeah, thank you. And you're right. It has been a focus. It's gotten a lot of attention, both for schools and even grocery stores or restaurants, right, with the latest guidelines. You know, student and staff safety is always a priority, even in normal times. And so it's become even a heightened focus now. Just briefly, you know, what we have been doing, what we're preparing to do more on the facility side and preparation is, you know, our last day of school was March 13th. Shortly thereafter, we went in and did a very thorough cleaning of all of our facilities. And most of those facilities have been unoccupied since March 13th. And so we are bringing in custodial staff for essential purposes throughout this time to get them ready. And we'll do so again before students return when that day comes in the fall in whatever capacity that might be. And I think we're also looking at the wonderful guidelines the Centers for Disease Control is putting out, as well as the California Department of Ed, to make sure we're prepared both with staffing and equipment to know what we need to do to make sure our campuses are safe for students and staff when they return.
So Mike, I know that in the questions that we looked at, there were a lot of questions about cleaning and how we're going to disinfect, and what kind of ideas and plans do you have in place for specialized cleaning?
Yeah, well, again, we're relying on those experts in the field and those guidelines, in particular CDC guidelines, with my colleagues in the county at other school districts, right, relying heavily on that. And they have some great charts and guidance on, you know, okay, is it an outdoor space or an indoor space? Because that determines what you do. If it's an indoor space, has it been occupied in the last 7 days? If it's been unoccupied, you know, routine cleaning is what's appropriate. If it's been occupied since then, use an EPA approved disinfectant against COVID-19, really going in those high touch areas, doorknobs, handles, desks, flat surfaces, those high touch areas, and make sure we're using appropriate disinfectants for those areas. We're also in the process of procuring those electrostatic sprayers that cling to, you know, things in the air and surfaces to really disinfect those surfaces. As you can imagine, some of those supplies have been unavailable, both because of the high demand as well as the supply chain issues coming from various countries importing those. But we've looked at different vendors and have some leads at purchasing those here at the end of June. So I think that's a big part. And we also going to look at, you know, whether custodial schedule and priorities are, you know, once school returns, right? And looking, do we need to shift those schedule? Maybe shift the routes and look at higher areas of focus to make sure we have the appropriate staff in those spaces.
That's excellent. And we did have a question that came in about that electrostatic sprayer. So specifically, and we're hearing great things about it. So Mike, we've heard a lot about PPE, which might need to be defined, personal protective equipment, but what would that include? Yeah,
well, in that regard, I have some great news kind of, you know, hot off the press. There was talk of the state, the California Department of Education, providing that to all school districts. That seems a huge task, and yet we're getting good news that they are coming through with that. We got word from the county, Santa Clara County Office of Education, that we will be receiving large shipments of that equipment. And so quickly it would look like for students, 2 cloth masks and 2 disposable masks per student in our district. The CD is looking at a 60-day supply to start with. And so this is what the numbers are based off of. For adults, 4 disposable masks and 2 cloth masks per staff including teachers. For teachers, 4 face shields per teacher. So they're really trying to look at all the different types of face coverings and ways to keep students and staff safe. In addition, providing thermometers for the schools, to check temperatures, depending on the guidance that, I know Layla Benson from the HR perspective was talking about earlier, as well as gallon jugs, 12 per school of hand sanitizer. So really trying to look at all those ways to protect students with that and staff with those personal protection equipment. And that's on top of the 2,000 masks we already purchased during shelter in place, the 250 bottles of Purell hand sanitizer, and 15 gallons of aloe vera gel ready to make kind of all natural hand sanitizer. So we have those in place, and we'll be getting those for the County Office of Education, shortly to have ready.
It's a good thing we have a big warehouse.
That's true.
I would say another question that has come to us, and we also had a specific question about that thermometer, that you walk into, and and we are looking at that. I know it might be cost prohibitive, but we're looking at that. But what modifications should we anticipate making with the campuses to assist with health and safety as we reopen?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's going to depend, the guidelines are changing weekly, if not daily, it seems. And what we know now on June, what is it, the 17th, and versus July 17th, and then before school. So I think we're positioning ourselves for what types of changes we would need to make. And that includes signage, in terms of keeping your distance, in terms of maybe wayfinding or directional arrows to create circulation paths, maybe propping open doors of the restrooms, for example, right? So there's not that, grabbing the handle in a high touch area. And we're also looking at how large are our classrooms or smaller are our classrooms, depending on the guidance of how many students is appropriate to have in an indoor space, as well as including our libraries or gyms, and looking at using some of those larger spaces maybe for uncommon uses, right? Maybe having a class in there because there's a larger area that's a non-PE class, for example. And we're also looking at adding those like plexiglass shields like you find at the supermarket at more of the office settings, right? Where you might have visitors coming in or students coming in to create more of that physical barrier, still see people and be able to interact, but in a way to keep people safe. And even looking at behavioral changes of how do we limit visitors to our campus, right? And really reduce the needs and numbers of people coming during this time where we're emphasizing, safety of students and staff.
And that comment could go back to Kristen Hardy. As we start to look at special education meetings, et cetera, we may need to find different venues. So one other question we had, parents were curious about the costs for school districts tied to the pandemic and also the support that we may or may not receive. How are you tracking costs and expenses related to COVID-19 and distance learning?
Yeah, sure. So we are definitely tracking all those costs. I won't get in the boring accounting details, but every expenditure has a little code, and we can add a little number at the end to track all this, because we want to know what the costs are. Also, it's important, we have applied for initial eligibility for FEMA reimbursement funding. So it's important to be able to track these costs. And the state, through Senate Bill 117, did provide our district $73,000 in initial funding for this. But we are tracking it through our accounting process. And we're trying to estimate what those total costs will be. It's a little challenging to exactly quantify it right now, because a lot of these are anticipated costs. And for example, the state and county came through with some PPE equipment that otherwise we would have to purchase. But we know there's costs. We are, Bob Fisher mentioned the hotspots and unlimited data. That's great, but that's at a cost of $20 a month per device. We talked about replacing laptops for teachers, additional Chromebooks. Some of those are things we would normally replenish. We're being a little more aggressive and doing some of those sooner than later. And we're fortunate, like our MVLA Foundation funds us to help replace a portion of our Chromebooks every year. So some of those costs, we're using existing funding sources, but we're also looking at technology and software costs. Some of that will be an additional expense now to help with distance learning platforms. The Google Suite is no cost to education, but there's some additional management fee costs, right? A learning management system has a cost with it, including the training. Some of the training of staff, the professional development related distance learning will have costs associated with it. So, rough order of magnitude of $400,000 to $500,000, I think, is a safe number when you look at all that, including personnel costs, we've incurred right now to bring people in for essential services. But we will definitely be tracking it. We are, and can give updates on those reports as more of those costs come in.
And I know we'll be hearing from you throughout the summer, because whenever a guideline changes, your world kind of shifts. So we appreciate that, and thank you. But good news keeps coming, so keep bringing that good news. Thanks.
Yes.
I'd now like to introduce our Associate Superintendent of Educational Services, Margarita Navarro. Margarita, I know you as well have been working hard and looking at how we can continue our academic excellence. And, it has been difficult, but we have heard from parents who have some specific questions. One is that they're concerned that their children missed out on important learning in the sudden move to distance learning. So could you share what we're doing to help students catch up and start the 2020-2021 school year on the right foot?
Great, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Meyer. Our teachers have been working hard already. I have about 180 teachers that since school ended have been collaborating and asking the same question. What we organize are in course teams, and those teachers have really looked at the content that was delivered this last semester, looking at the whatever assessment data they've been able to pull, including the engagement data, and really looking at to what extent they were able, to address all of their content and skills that they had intended, and then being able to provide information to the next level up, to the next course up about particular areas that may need some revisiting, some reteaching in the new school year. So that's one of the efforts that we are in the moment doing right now. Our teachers started with some collaboration hours, and we'll be rolling out our professional learning plan, as Bob Bistrom mentioned a few minutes ago, fairly soon, that we'll go into great detail of our comprehensive professional learning plan that will include summer hours from now until August. And then we do have a training plan for when August comes and teachers return. So that's one of our key conversations right now among teachers, is that what we refer to as vertical alignment. What is happening at one level? What information can they give to the next level so that they are prepared to roll out their curriculum? The second thing that we've also are in conversation about is what types of assessment can we do at the very start of the school year to give us some baseline data. So for example, math teachers right now, we're looking at a particular assessment, a standardized assessment. We're looking at a few different ones that we would do from Algebra 1 all the way to Trig. And so that will give teachers valuable information at the very start of the school year of any particular areas that they need to focus on to be able to access the new curriculum. English teachers are doing the same thing. AP teachers are doing the same. So we're looking at different resources. The College Board and the CDE is also coming out with some recommendations as to how to do this. So this is definitely an area of priority for us right now in the summer months.
So that'll be helpful. We'll hear more about some of those more specific diagnostic tests.
Correct.
Another question that came up, Margarita, parents are asking about grades and assessments given the spring of 2020 where we had credit, no credit. What will fall 2020 look like? And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So as it was mentioned at our last board meeting, we are awarding letter grades in the fall. That the credit, no credit was only specific to the spring of 20. So we will be issuing grades. And so being that we're going to issue grades, obviously our teachers need to have conversations about grading, our grading system, and also our assessments. Typically, this is a typical conversation that we would have anyhow. This is a conversation that our course teams, again, are central to their work. We have two approaches to assessment. In EduSpeak, we refer to them as formative and summative assessments. And so again, this is the typical conversation we would be having anyhow. The challenge is how do you do that from a remote environment? So we are looking at digital tools, and we did actually employ some of those tools this past spring when we were in phase 1 and phase 2 of distance learning. So again, working and using those tools will help us formatively assess and summatively assess students. It is a conversation that will take place in that professional learning that I talked about a second ago. But there are very specific things that we're looking at to employ this fall.
And it sounds like from what you said that we're learning from other organizations who are assessing, including our own organization, Adult Education. So another question that came to us, and it was mentioned earlier from Dave Campbell and from a teacher's perspective, but I know also you're looking at creating some supports around how to build community in a virtual environment. So you've been working on resources for engaging students, and could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. I think that as a high school district, that's one thing that we always have to be very cognizant of, is how do we onboard and welcome our new students? And I'm talking particularly about our 9th graders, but also any new students, whether they're a new 10th grader or 11th grader because they came from elsewhere. So that's something that we put a lot of thought into every year, and I partner with the schools to create orientation activities and all sorts of different onboarding activities. One thing that we are doing a little bit more of this year is how to do that earlier and how to do that virtually. And so we're just about the point to launch class of 2024 portal. So it's a portal for new families, particularly for 9th graders. It's also relevant to other grade levels, but any new student that's coming to MBLA, it's kind of a welcome platform. So it'll be on our website. We will push that out through many different communiques, and just an opportunity just to get to know MBLA. So the welcome videos that Dave was mentioning about earlier, we have a whole piece in there where we have the PE teacher welcoming, or the English teacher, welcoming, just to really put a face to a name that they're gonna see later on. So we have that, and then we have our portal will go into different areas of what 9th grader or new families need to know. The technology orientation, so what tools are going to be using, the email address, the SIS portal, all the different areas that they have to become familiar with. But also, what should a typical 9th grader know coming in? So kind of the culture and the community of MBLA. So giving, our families a heads up. The other thing that we're going to add to the portal is a survey. So we're going to ask all the 9th graders, incoming 9th graders, to please take the survey. So it'll give us an opportunity to learn a little bit about what types of tools you have at home for remote learning, or just any other things that we need to know about you before the school year starts.
And what I think you've described is, and I'm hearing throughout the conversation, there will be things that we are doing that we would not have done if not for school closure, that we will want to keep and continue as we go on. So that welcome is a perfect example. So another question that has come is, what kind of training will be provided for teachers for next year? And I know you're in the middle of developing that, but will it include training on building community? I know we heard about the training for technology. Do you have any specifics?
Sure. The training that we're going to offer is actually going to focus on all aspects of learning, and building community is definitely one of those aspects. And I have to thank Dave for already mentioning many of the things that our teachers employed during the spring. A few of those that he mentioned actually sound very familiar, because our instructional support team did all sorts of drop-in sessions for our teachers, Zoom trainings during phase 1 and phase 2 of how to do those things, whether it's using Flipgrid, or how to create the journey through my home. All those different ideas were generated in those conversations with the support team, the instructional support team, so that's that and much more. We've really been tapping into the experts right now. So for example, San Jose State School of Education has launched an entire library of virtual training for educators. It's free to the public. And so we've pushed that through all of our teachers to participate in that. And much of what they're offering are sessions on community building. There's another nonprofit organization. It's called CUE. It stands for Computer Using Educators. They also did a conference, a virtual conference a couple of weeks ago, and they have a larger one coming up in July. definitely have pushed that out to my staff so that they can learn from these existing organizations that already do a hybrid or remote type of learning. The county offices, the CDE has also pushed out a lot of great resources. And so one of the goals is two-part, is, you know, having our teachers tap into those, but also us learning from that and being able to create our own in-house training modules. And that's part of the plan that you made reference to, that we'll be pushing out very soon.
And I know Q classes are often held at our Krause Center at Foothill Community College as well. So they're there every summer. I hope they're there this summer as well. One other question that came up from parents, and it really is about how we're evaluating whether a program is working. What are the dimensions that you are evaluating for success, or how will we know we have success for the fall of 2020, for all or part of it, whether it's hybrid or distance? What are we looking for to show us that we've been successful?
Sure. I think the things that we would be looking for are the things that we would typically look for in the school year. The extra challenge is, if we are hybrid or remote, what are the other additional things that we'll be looking for? So the typical things that we look for, and we will be, you know, very cognizant of during this time, is definitely how our students are doing grade-wise. So we have different marking periods when we collect data from teachers, at the progress report, at the quarter report, you know, definitely before the semester. So really paying close attention to that grade data is going to be really important. So that's one of them. The second is, you know, looking at our attendance monitoring and our engagement monitoring. And those things are still being ironed out, but really paying attention to what extent are students engaging and or attending the learning as it's prescribed, and just, you know, having more frequent check-ins of that data and who is engaged and who is not engaged. These systems we actually built during phase 1 and phase 2 of distance learning. So we would just make those a little bit more sophisticated for the fall, but we already have some practices that we built during this time that help us gauge how our students are doing in school. Another metric that I would be paying attention to is wellness data. And so our referrals up. You know, what from William's office, you know, or from the mental health teams at the school sites, what can we learn about what types of needs or issues are being raised by students or staff about students or families. So I want to pay attention to that. Because as William mentioned, you know, there might be a rise on some of these cases, and that would, you know, inevitably affect, you know, students' ability to learn effectively. And then another thing that we did ongoing during phase 1, phase 2 is just being able to survey our students and our teachers, and to a certain extent we could survey our community about just how they're experiencing whatever the learning model is, and just giving us feedback. And so we did that a number of times, and it was valuable in order for us to plan the next step or to make any adjustments along the way.
I'm really glad to hear we're focusing in on engagement, because as students come back, the re-engaging process will look different this year. So thank you. So our next presenter will be Bill Pierce. And I know, Bill, you have been off and on. There you are. You've been off and on of the Wi-Fi.
I'm on.
You're on now. Director of Alternative Education Services, Principal of Alta Vista. Bill, at our continuation high school, we know that the plans may differ. Could you share how they would differ from our traditional high school?
Absolutely, and I'm hoping I can stay on with you as long enough to talk about this. So being an alternative school and being small, we can be a little bit more nimble. We are looking right now at trying to come back in some sort of hybrid model right from the get-go. We have a small enough enrollment, and we have the practices and protocols in place already. Being an alternative program, we feel like we can probably meet the needs of a hybrid program pretty quickly. If not within the, to start with, within, I would say the first month, probably we would be able to get kids back on campus in some fashion.
Great. And I understand you shared with me from the days of Rick Fisher that you often are used as pilots because of your size and your ability to try things on quickly. Another question came.
Yes.
Could you share information about online high school offerings that we currently have in the district and where?
Absolutely. So the district has been using Odysseyware as an online platform for some dozen, perhaps 15 years now. It's the primary tool that the adult school uses for all of its independent study programs during the school year and during summer school. I know that Los Altos uses it. Alta Vista has certainly used it. And that particular platform is not going away. In fact, we purchased a lot more licenses for the summer, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't continue to use those. So that curriculum is all A to G. It's accessible to any of the students in the district, and will continue to be.
Okay, and there are others that we have heard come up. UC Scout was one. We have other different types of programs that I know we've used and we've talked about a little bit as well. So another question that came to us, and this applies to the other programs that you supervise. Could you share plans for the middle college, College Now, Freestyle, and how they are looking at fall reopening for 2020?
Sure. Dave touched a little bit on middle college. They'll continue with their synchronous platform that they've been using this year and increase that. They will be following, they and College Now will be following the Foothill College protocol. All of Foothill courses will be virtual through spring quarter. And so the middle college program and College Now will continue to operate that way as well. Although the middle college program is looking at ways to bring in small groups of kids for that personal face time that is so desperately needed. The Freestyle program is also hoping that they will be able to do some sort of hybrid early in the process. So even if Mountain View and Los Altos need to continue doing distance learning for a time, the alternative programs are in a little bit different position where we may be able to do hybrid sooner.
And Bill, will there be a continuance of the social emotional support at middle college via telehealth?
Absolutely. All the alternative programs, all the things that William talked about will definitely be in place for all the alternative programs as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else you want us to know?
I'm sorry, everybody seems to be frozen. I'm not sure if you're, I'm still struggling with this.
No, that's okay. Did you have any last comments or anything you wanted to share, Bill?
I don't think so. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'm glad you popped back in. That was good. You worried us for a moment.
I'll try and stay for the rest as well.
Okay. I want to say that a lot of the questions that we had were specific, and they wanted to know about, you know, the specifics and the important actions that we do each and every day at our wonderful traditional high schools. And so I would like to introduce Principal Wynn Satterwhite, principal of Los Altos and an Eagle. And I would have some questions for you, Wynn. First question, how are we planning for different schedules and how will that be communicated to parents?
Thank you, Dr. Meyer. It's a joy to be here today. As we've talked about over and over again, there is a task force working on this transition plan. And in order for us to be as fluid as we can, and we may be switching back and forth between online learning, hybrids, whatever, really depends on what information we get from the state and the county. The nice part about the task force is that we have people from all different aspects of the community in terms of our school community and in terms of our other programs that are sitting down and really having hard conversations. How do we best meet the needs of students? And that is always the measuring stick that we hold up there. So right now, we're just waiting on the final updates. But in the meantime, we have come up with plans about how we can transition between these different learning plans. smoothly so that, that students are not disrupted, that learning's not disrupted, and that we can continue to offer the academic excellence that we're so used to doing.
And I'm glad you mentioned when the advisory teams and we are we have had one brief meeting with parents, but we are looking at representative groups, certainly from your school. Your school was represented, and we're listening to parents not only about the questions for today, but about these schedules and about the plans that we have. So that will go on through this summer. Another question that we had is, what is the process if a student is struggling or if a teacher is not engaging with the class?
So my first response would be, it would be just like during in-seat time. The place that students need to start and parents need to start is with the teacher, because that's where the interaction happens on a daily basis. If that doesn't get the results that parents or students need, then I would suggest that we move to the counselors, because the counselors are the next stage in that. And then I would say go to your assistant principal. If that doesn't help, they are always welcome to talk to me, but it really does need to start at the teacher level, because they're the ones who are interacting with the student on a daily basis. And oftentimes it's miscommunication. While I love our students dearly, they are not always the best at communicating what a teacher might say to their parents. And so I think trying to clean up that communication at that level is the best place to start. And then if it doesn't work, you just kind of keep going up that chain until we can figure out what's wrong. But we will figure out what's going on.
Okay, thank you. That question came up especially around distance learning, because that was a difficult challenge on how do you monitor and make sure things are happening. So the next question we have, what about classes that don't lend themselves to distance learning? So we've talked a little bit about science labs or performing arts, perhaps, PE, culinary arts comes to mind. What are the options that you see for these type of classes?
Well, I think even though it was difficult, our distance learning with those programs was pretty amazing. Those teachers really stepped up to the plate. Culinary was delivering ingredients to students so they could cook. You know, robotics was having kits delivered to the homes. Our music, as Dave mentioned earlier, our performing arts people were doing a lot of really unique and interesting things. So while that project-based learning does not lend itself super well to distance learning, we again have to follow the state guidelines. So even if we were looking at some sort of hybrid model, we're limited to how many students we can actually bring into an area or a space. So I think we'll continue to work on this group of students will probably look at some sort of potential of being brought in earlier, because they need to have the equipment that they're working with. But the bottom line comes down to is that we have to follow the guidelines that we're given, and we're very well aware of the fact that these are more difficult courses to do distance learning wise, and those teachers are really working this summer to try to figure out how to address those needs.
All right, and I love your culinary arts example, because they did a grab and go, just like our lunch students had a grab and go. They grabbed their materials and took them home and cooked, and so that was wonderful. Last question. I know this has been something we've been spending a lot of time on. I've spent a lot of time with you and with Dave Grissom, and it's of great interest to parents and community. Parents are asking how we will handle athletics, in particular, our strong athletic program, but also other things like the arts, as you mentioned, club activities. What can we share about how we will handle those different types of activities?
Well, like Mr. Matheson just shared, we have some kind of hot off the press news, and that is starting Monday the 22nd, we will be able to have small cohorts of athletes on campus again. So we received some guidelines, and we both Dave and I met with our coaches yesterday to talk about what those guidelines. Coaches are now reaching out to their athletes, but just so parents get a sense of this, it will be very specific cohorts of no more than 12 students with one coach. Students cannot be involved in multiple sports. They can't be involved in school sports and sports outside. So if somebody's in AAU basketball, they cannot be in our activities. Really trying to make sure that we are getting kids back on the campuses and active and doing things in a very healthy and safe way. This is going to be challenging, and as we've shared with the coaches, they are kind of the guinea pigs about how we're going to bring people back on campus. So we really need them to be very clear with parents and students about how that process is going to happen. again, working with state and local guidelines and officials, that's how we will determine what we do with athletics. Right now, the seasons are still kind of up in the air, but we are trying to get kids back for some preconditioning. We are also trying to figure out how and when those things increase. So the rules are pretty specific about what we want kids to be doing with their coaches. When you talk about like the arts, I think one of the things that people may not be aware of, and again, Dave Campbell mentioned this, the schools have put on amazing plays and concerts and art exhibits through this virtual learning. And if you haven't had an opportunity, I'm hoping to see these. I'm hoping that we can put some of these up on our web pages, because it's amazing what these kids have accomplished. And when you think about not only the craft that they're showing, but then their ability to use these different platforms to do it on, it's 21st century learning skills, which is both of the WASCs that our school has been part of. So I think it's important for parents and students to know our goal is to get kids back and be as creative as we can.
Okay, and I did hear that part about it was part of our WASC goal. And in times like this, when I'm glad you brought it up, we need the arts now more than ever, because it's such a great outlet and such a way to express how we're feeling when we're having challenges. So kudos to those who did all of that hard work. I want to share that these questions were provided by our parents, and we had wonderful questions, as you can see, and we're going to continue to reach out to our parent community and certainly engage on these topics and share some of the work that we have. We have Monday night, I don't know if anyone on this panel wants to watch it again because they were part of it, but we have a comprehensive video of more details. If anyone in the audience listening is interested in that presentation, that is available on our website, and it goes through each of the groups and talks about the actions that we are proposing. And I also want to share that this particular presentation was recorded, and that we're developing more FAQs from the questions that we are fielding and that are coming in. And we do plan to have additional opportunities to engage just like this during the summer. I also want to just really thank everyone who presented today. I know you put a lot of thought and time into it, and really thanks for that. But I would like to ask if I could pass to Fiona Walter, our Vice President, and she is going to close us out. Fiona.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to thank the parents and community members for sticking with us this afternoon, coming to the webinar. We were across 500 strong, about 521 attendees at one point. And I hope that this helps you as a community put faces to names for our educational experts who are working these issues on all of our behalf. If you look at this panel, Layla, Bill, Wynn, Mike, Nellie, William, Bob, Kristen, Dave, Margarita, these folks are working these problems around the clock, and I'm so grateful to have all of you as our educational experts, as our educational leaders, and I look forward to hearing all the recommendations coming forth from all of you for a successful reopening for our kids in the fall. So just thank you so much to both panelists and attendees.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our supportive Board of Education. We will be speaking again, and we look forward to continuing to review the guidance and see what news comes in the end of June, beginning of July. So thanks so much, everybody. Bye.